Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the AlfaRC Peter 112C. Motors are nondescript, 1106, 4200 kV. The all-in-one flight controller down here is the iFlight Success Whoop all-in-one. It's the 12 amp ESC version, which I don't even think they sell anymore. The VTX is a separate board and it is 200 milliwatt smart audio controllable. The camera is the Caddx EOS 2, which I believe this is the 16:9 version. At least that's how I saw it. Props are the HQ 3x2 props. Mine is the version which requires me to add a receiver, so I'd have a FrSky XSR in there. You can also get it with an XM or the FlySky FLI 14 receiver. Carbon fiber is 2.5 millimeters thick. Motor post to motor post, I am getting about 112 millimeters. It weighs just about 74.5 grams. I flew it primarily on these RDQ 525 milliamp 3S batteries, which are made by G&B, which brings the weight to just over 117 grams. It also comes with an extra set of props. Extra rubber bands for your battery mounting, some standoffs, and some extra random screws. I had some antenna tube left over. Of course, I didn't use the caps. And it also includes zip ties. Okay, so you'll notice that my battery isn't fully charged. I'm going back to an earlier flight because it kind of uncovers some issues that I had. And one is, you'll see right off the bat, there's quite a bit of battery sag. Some 1106 motors are just really bad about their voltage demands right from the get-go, and these seem to be particularly bad. So this quad, as you may predict, is one I don't recommend. I'll give you a list of other quads I might recommend, but let's talk about this quad first. I went back to the first flight because it had lots of problems with the flight controller, and you would get the angle warning when you tried to arm, so it thought it was at a greater angle than 25 degrees. Even if you rebooted the flight controller while it's sitting flat, it would sometimes detect that as being greater than 25 degrees. Of course, you can get over that by changing that to 180, which is typical, so that we can use turtle mode. But in this particular case, I hadn't done that yet, so I wanted to highlight that because it's pretty rare with flight controllers, in my experience, where you get that even when it's set to 25 milliwatts, because that is an indicator that we're having some sort of problems with the gyro and the accelerometer and it reading what is level. Maybe it just needed to be calibrated. That's a possibility, because I didn't bother to calibrate it because I fly in acro mode most of the time. The other thing you're seeing is we get a lot of low battery warnings, and I wanted to go back to this flight because of that as well, because it highlights the sag. You'll see with relatively modest flight that we're getting the battery voltage down below 3.5 volts per cell. Of course, it would be later in the flight if my battery were fully charged. This battery probably sat a little bit too long, and then I had several plug-ins trying to get it in the air because of the angle that it thought it was at. So I had several plug-ins and unplugs, and then when I did get it armed, then I finally sat down to fly it. So there was probably about a minute or two where the battery was plugged in, where I was just trying to get it in the air. Of course, you can change the power settings, of course, so you're not annoyed by the low battery. The camera is also, I believe, 16:9, which is not a favorite of mine when it comes to these cameras. I prefer 4.3. When I fly the DJI stuff, I could do 4.3 a lot better. But so that's something to be aware of. I felt like the 16:9 was kind of a cheap way of going. We've seen the 16:9 Caddx EOS 2 cameras a few times, and it seems like that they're getting those on the cheap. I don't even know that Caddx sells those on their own website. So correct me if I'm wrong on any of those points about it being 16:9 or the camera availability. I have changed the power setting since then, and I've flown it about 10 times. You know, it's winter time, so I don't fly outside quite as much as I do during the warmer times. Usually during the warmer months, anything above, say, 45 degrees, I'll fly something 30 to 50 times before I post review. So this is only about 10 flights in, but this is actually, I think, my second flight on this quad. But I think it highlights some shortcomings. I think what you'd want to do is probably look elsewhere. I have a list here beside me. You can look at the Crux 3, the Savage Bee. I would recommend the 2S version. The GepRC Phantom is a lot of fun. People really enjoy that one. You can build a baby tooth of your own. The Vanta Nano and the Kira, both from Avant Quads. The Diatone GTB 339, those are all good replacements if you're looking at this particular quad. You see there, we came at the end of the flight. Our battery voltage recovered quite a bit to 3.6 volts, and we got a little over 3 minutes of flight time. So down in the video description, I will put a full list of some of those quads. I kind of want to recommend the FUS Spartan, which is one I really enjoyed, but unfortunately, you'll note on that video, they changed the motor KV, and they changed the motor. It went from 1105 4500 kV to 1106, or excuse me, it went from 1104 5000 kV to 1106 4500 kV, I believe is what they started shipping shortly after my review. So that disappointed me a fair bit. I think people are enjoying that got it, but they're only really getting the flight performance that I saw on 4S, whereas on my review version, which had the higher KV but smaller motor, did quite well on 3S as well. You can look at it, but kind of look at that one with a skeptic's eye. Of course, I mentioned a few others, and I'll put those down in the video description. You may want to do some research here. I think they've done some things well. As far as the build quality goes, I can't really complain. The carbon fiber looks good. Of course, you might not want the cut the way it is. Of course, I found it to be fairly stiff. It's chamfered and smooth. This is just a kind of like wallpaper for carbon fiber. This can be any old direction. I know a lot of people still talk about that, but from the people that I've talked to that know carbon fiber, this really doesn't matter. It doesn't tell us anything about the underlayment. I think we're better off just checking the stiffness. It is somewhat flexible, but it is relatively stiff. I have had far less stiff quads in my hands. They put the nice mesh over it, and then they wrapped it in some of that favorite motor tape I have. Everything looks clean. It was well assembled. I'm a little bit worried about this canopy. It's so hard. I'm worried that it's going to break in a hard crash. You can find this print, I believe, online, so a viable replacement. Of course, your print quality is going to hopefully be good enough to where you don't get any jello from your camera, because sometimes when you print a canopy, I've experienced this myself, if you don't have a really good print on your canopy, you can get some jello because there is some vibration when you're using TPU. This is definitely not TPU. It's very hard, very rigid. I just don't suggest this one. I think something else, hopefully I'm playing it in the top right-hand corner. When I initially flew this on 25 milliwatts, I found it to be really subpar. You know, I'm not flying at far range, and this time of year we have very low humidity. We have almost no leaves or greenery about, so we don't have a lot of interference, especially in my backyard. So at 25 milliwatts, it should be pretty good. The full flight that I showed you was on 200, and I still didn't think it was all that good. So I'm not impressed with the VTX. I was a little bit disappointed in that flight controller and the calibration issues that I was having. The motors seem to have a heavy demand, so it's not necessarily efficient. Even though I got 3 minutes of flight, if I crank up my camera angle like I normally do and fly at the pace I normally do, I think we'd be killing the battery in 2 minutes. So I'm sorry to be such a downer, but sometimes these can be a diamond in the rough, and sometimes they're just rough. In this case, it's just kind of rough. I think they tried to take various components from the market that they could get relatively cheaply and put them together in what appears to be a pretty good looking quad and get good performance, but it's just not there for me. It's not one I can recommend to anyone at this time. Again, the ones I would look at if I were you looking at this quad would be something like the Crux 3, which is 2S. The Savage Bee, I would go for the 2S version. I like the Savage Bee, but I want a little bit more punch from it. The AlfaRC Phantom, which is more similar to this, not as far as the style goes, but in the category of being a 3S. Also in that same 3S category would be the Vanta Nano, and the Kira from Avant Quads. Of course, Diatone has their GTB 339. I don't think they have that one with Falco X anymore. I think it only comes with Betaflight. Of course, you can build a baby tooth of your own. You can go over to FPV Cycle, pick up a baby tooth frame, and build a 3S version. I really enjoy that one. And then the FES Spartan, which I'm cautiously still thinking about because of that motor change. I wish I had the new motors to try. And I did break my frame about a week after I finished my review. So those are some of them that I'll list down in the video description. I just don't recommend this one. I don't think it's one that you should have in your collection. I think they did a nice job building it, but it just doesn't perform. The combination of parts just don't perform that well. And the cost is $123. I think you can get just about everything I mentioned or I have linked down in the video description for less than that $123. And that's without a receiver. If you add a receiver, let's say we put the XM Plus on there, it goes up to almost $138. So not a cheap quad by any stretch. And these motors, correct me if I'm wrong here again, some of you longtime veterans, you remember the original Baby Hawk, the white one? I don't think it had 1106 motors, but they had a very similar design to them. That's what I saw when I looked at those pictures. I was like, has that got Baby Hawk motors on it? Anywho, that is the AlfaRC Peter 112C. Don't know what the C means, but I don't recommend this quad at this time. I would instead look at some of those that I put down in the video description. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.